Muchachos, amigos, and welcome to Record Breakers, a music podcast where a group of friends gather together to share music with each other, an album at a time. It's like a little book club for music. Fun time had by all. I'm Petey Rave, and here with me is my triumvirate, my gang, my crew, my friends. We've got David Majors, aka DJM.
Buenos tacos, muchachos. I have two things I want you to get from this episode. One, a band is more than its singer. Two, justice for Steve Hackett.
Mm-hmm. And all the way at the end, we have Drew Snyder.
It was cool.
We're here to talk about music. We're here to talk about an album, and the provider of the album is David. David, what have you brought forth for us?
I am the provider of this album, and I feel like this one is long overdue and a long time coming. This is my favorite album from a band from a very significant time in the world of progressive rock. The year is 1976. Genesis had just split from their front man, Peter Gabriel, who left to pursue what would eventually become an extremely successful solo career. The four remaining band members, founding members, keyboardist Tony Banks and bassist Mike Rutherford, knew they would have no problem writing songs because Genesis was always a collective of songwriters, including lead guitarist Steve Hackett and drummer Phil Collins. So it was quickly agreed upon that Genesis would continue. The next step was finding a new singer. They had a number of auditions, but they were never able to find anyone that really was as good as Phil. And in the end, everyone decided that Phil was the guy. Phil took the position as lead vocalist, did the drums on the album, and the rest is history. Also, during this period, Steve Hackett, lead guitarist, released a solo album with Rutherford and Collins on bass and drums. So Genesis at this point was still very much together, still very much a thing. And they came out swinging with this album, A Trick of the Tail.
Mm-hmm. Drew, what were your expectations coming into this album?
Well, I knew some Genesis. I knew, of course, Phil Collins. I watched Disney movies in the 90s, so I was familiar with Phil Collins and his vocal stylings. But it was something that I've never super dove into an entire album. So while I knew sort of the idea of this is going to be some musicians playing some music-ass music, I was not 100% sure of where that was going to go. So I was excited, to say the least.
Mm-hmm. I was tangentially aware of the work, aware of the emotion behind it. I heard that like the end got weird and convoluted. Oh wait, no, I'm thinking the Genesis Evangelion.
But you're also correct.
Yes. No, I Genesis is a band you're kind of like aware of, especially like just knowing that Phil Collins is a person that is you're aware of, because if you're of an age that has ever watched TV, like there's something that where Phil Collins is mentioned either due to his work or due to making fun of him, or something along the lines. And you kind of like, if you look at that, that he was part of this group. I had a general idea of what to expect, because I think I just never got around to checking out going back to something like Genesis, especially kind of this, because a lot of it was before my time, and it probably wasn't something that my brother was listening to. where he was probably mostly listening to Zeppelin and fucking the Stones or whatever. So I was intrigued to kind of actually finally put myself in a place to actually envelop myself in Genesis. David, how would you describe this album musically?
I would describe this album musically as closer to some of Genesis's previous albums before The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, which in many ways was Peter Gabriel's masterwork during his time in Genesis. This album, given that it was written and composed by the other four members of the band, was definitely more in line with their first 4 or 5 albums from 1970s Trespass up until Selling England by the Pound and their next album. It's very much in that classic English 70s progressive sound that Genesis, yes, not as off the rails as King Crimson, a little more orchestral than Rush, but their contemporaries were more like Yes and Van de Graaff Generator and Gentle Giant. Interesting lead synth sounds, fantastic drumming, because really this was around the time where Phil Collins was really rounding into form. Steve Hackett's guitar work was really, really great. And Genesis had sort of gotten back to their sort of whimsical fantasy, but not quite fantasy lyrics that they made their mark during the 70s, where it was sort of under the guise of fantasy, but it was also very much about the modern world and England in particular in the 70s. I've said for many, many years that of this time period, Genesis is my absolute favorite of this era, of this time. And I think this album really shows that the band, to which even Peter Gabriel himself said would have no problem carrying on.
Mm-hmm. Drew, how would you describe this album musically? Oh, you're muted.
You are muted, Mr. Drew.
Yes, I was muted. So I will say my first couple of times listening to this were speakers either in my car or downstairs, which after listening on headphones once, I think might have been a slight mistake, because the use of space, like sonic space, I think was absolutely incredible. The instrumentation throughout was incredible. This was Phil Collins' first time singing lead and sounds completely in his element all the way through. The guitar work was absolutely phenomenal. There was some great bass stuff, but also the ability, what prog does, whether it's prog rock straight up, prog metal, whatever, what I always am surprised by, and maybe this is my teenage years being all about punk rock, is the use of silence as an instrument to allow openness and singularity to play. At times, there was also times where it almost felt like it was coming off as, are they just kind of like fucking diving in and riffing? Like, this is nuts, the stuff they're coming up with. This is something that I feel like having it come out when it did in, if I remember, if I looked at it right, it was 76?
1976.
76, okay. Knew it was right in there, mid to late. This is a setup for a lot, I feel like, that you get in late 70s and like early 80s prog, and in all of the best ways. Like they lost a key member, and yet I feel like this album didn't miss anything necessarily for it. And that's not a slight at Peter Gabriel as a vocalist. That's just the strength of the other musicians as who the fuck they are, I guess.
Peter Gabriel even said that himself.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like this is a quintessential like prog release. It is like Drew said, like just very cool, like being in that headspace. I did it mostly with my headphones, and like being in that like that atmosphere with the music, like the musicality of it is really cool. It's very like airy and spacey, but like has so much like details, and the of course the drums are fantastic, and Phil Collins sounds like Phil Collins, as people are familiar with. But it works really well. It's definitely very 70s, but I think in a great way that still feels like you can dig on it. Yeah, and it kind of just like, it is really like fun and like odd and cool. I don't know. I wish I was a little bit smarter and knew more.
Fun, odd, and cool is good enough. Yeah. Fun, odd, and cool is perfect.
Yeah, I wish I knew more of the terminology to kind of really like drill into it, but I think that it sounded good. It sounded good, and it sounded really well made, and then like airy and fun. Yeah. Yeah, let's get into the key tracks. David, what would be the key tracks for you?
Sorry, Drew, I'm gonna do the thing. I've always said,
can't not with this.
I've always said that I like to put myself back in 1976. Peter Gabriel has left Genesis. The other four members are carrying on as a quartet. I'm putting on this album, and I'm hearing the opener, Dance on a Volcano. And this track immediately lets me know that Genesis, as I know them, are going to be just fine. This is a strong quartet. There is some soloing. There's a crazy prog rock midsection. The main verse is in 7/8. Phil Collins sounds completely in control as the lead vocalist. This is Genesis. They are going to be fine. Squonk. Squonk is the song of legend that is the song that Phil sang as his unofficial audition for the job. And also, this was the song that Phil himself said he wanted to get a little bit of his Led Zeppelin on and do a little bit of a John Bonham thing. And this song, I think, is just a really good, concise song. I think this one and the title track are perfect examples of the fact that Genesis, every member of the band had good quality songwriting, while also having a song like Dance on Volcano where they can just go nuts. Also, Ripples is a great ballad where you get to hear Steve Hackett do one of his signature guitar solos, and you also get to hear Phil Collins showing off his vocal range. Young Phil Collins, he would have been only like maybe 25, 26 at the time, was as good a singer as he was a drummer around this time. And he really got to show off his vocal range on Ripples and Robbery, Assault, and Battery.
Mm-hmm. Drew, what would be some of the key tracks for you?
Like I said, you have to do the Dance on a Volcano. You have to. Like, the bass tone alone, like, is enough for entry, but utilizing that like almost digital sounding reverb with that guitar part, and just sort of letting that fuzz of that reverb play, I think it's brilliant. And that lasts for about a minute. And then there's the like short verse of almost musical chaos that happens that then like slowly bends its, I say slowly, but like over the course of like 30, 40 seconds, slowly bends back into what becomes the reprieve, the chorus, and then melding back in. I think was brilliant. That in and out, that ebb and flow. I've always known Phil Collins was a good singer. Madman Moon, I believe, is where I figured out Phil Collins is a great singer. That is where the realization was like, oh shit, this dude's got actual pipes. It's not just, oh, hey, the drummer can sing. That works. Like, oh, this dude could have been the singer, not the drummer.
He's actually the best one of all.
Yeah, it's fucking wild. And then robbery, assault, and battery. Specifically the last like minute and a half, 2 minutes that like builds into this end of like constant like drum fills and like last minute pullouts and like snapbacks in tone and music, like instrumentation, was just like the best ending 2 minutes of any song I've heard in a long time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. If I were to pick up a couple things, I would say ditto to what everyone else said. But I will add my only couple notes. That I really liked Entangled being this kind of like really airy and floaty track, almost Lord of the Ringsy, in a way, and I just kind of like felt like that. And I like Squonk.
There's a lot of that in early Genesis. There's a lot of that.
And Squonk, not just for everything that's been said about the performance and the vocal performance and like the musicality, but also it's a really fun name. And the fact that it's named after a cryptid is really cool. Like
in the closet off.
It's like, and you know the fact that the cryptid is named after, when captured, dissolves in a pool of tears is a mood. Honestly, is a mood. Let's bring it back around the horn and talk about some conclusive thoughts. Drew, what would be your conclusion on this album as a whole?
There was what I'm reminded of in this moment as I'm searching for the right words. A wise man came on this podcast one time after I brought an album and just said, it's fucking Michael Jackson. And I am going to say here, it's fucking Genesis. Like that, there are certain artists that, like, if you're into the genre even a little bit, you know that if you dive in, what you're going to find, as another wise man that used to be on this podcast would often say, a lot of gold in them there hills. And this being the tour de force of Genesis saying, hey, we can soldier on and we can still be greater than the sum of our parts together because we care enough about doing this that we're going to figure it out, even if our lead singer wants to go do his own solo thing. And it coming out as good, if not greater than the stuff, something that is a time period that when I think of Genesis now, I think of Phil Collins as the singer. Like, and that was through their own tenacity and drive and inspiration and musicianship that can be the thing that exists.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. If I were to bring anything to my conclusion, would be just that it is a tour de force in like in iconic prog. Like, it was cool to kind of like dive into something that was new to me, but obviously something that I was very keenly aware of as far as like it being a big band in general, but a big band in the musical makeup of David's musical fandom. So it was always going to be intriguing to kind of like dive into, and it did not disappoint. It was just an excellent, classic, iconic album. Not much else. David, last but not least, what will be your conclusion on this album as a whole?
I think that it is really a testament to the collective musicianship of all four other members that they were able to put out not one, but two albums in the same year that were of this caliber. Wind and Wuthering came out later in 1976, another great album. This is the album that Steve Hackett would leave afterwards. The reason why is because Steve Hackett was sort of the George Harrison of Genesis. They didn't let him do a lot, unfortunately. But I've always said that from 1970's Trespass all the way up to these two albums in 1976 are a string of, I think, six albums that I would put up against any band in that era at the time. And I think the fact that they were able to not just survive, but thrive after someone that is a juggernaut like Peter Gabriel, but continue to thrive afterwards, that's a testament to them. There is always the thought of that alternate universe where Steve Hackett stayed with Genesis and they carried on as a quartet, but we got two really good albums in 1976 from it. It's a little bittersweet that the fact that this album was as excellent as it was, because it is. You hear every member really at their peak and in their prime. And I hope that people don't sleep on this one or Wind and Wuthering. Don't sleep on either of those albums.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, that kind of puts a nice bow on our thoughts on...
This is my favorite Genesis album, for the record.
As it should be. That puts a nice bow on our thoughts on Genesis as a trick of the tail. Now we get to the main event of the evening, the moment we've all been waiting for, the haiku reviews, where we sum it all up in poetic form. 575. Let's get down to the nitty gritty.
Or 7-8 if you're fancy.
Yeah. Haikumero numero uno. Drew, what is your haiku?
Legendary work with a debut vocalist paved the future.
Mm-hmm. My haiku: Phil's first turn on lead, and it goes swimmingly well. Crisis averted. And David, what is your haiku?
Still in their Prog prime. No Gabriel, no problem. An elite quartet.
Mm-hmm. And those are our thoughts on Genesis's A Trick of the Tail. And you can, of course, find it on our Spotify playlist, Play Record Breakers, the home game. Do your due diligence and your due diligence. We have two playlists over on Spotify. We have a playlist on YouTube where you can also follow along, where we take advantage of all the YouTube music links and just kind of compile it all together with the episodes. On those playlists, presumably, will be next week's album, and it's going to be provided by Drew. Drew, what have you got for us?
Well, I decided to go with a dude who, wherever the fuck he's living right now, whatever the fuck he's doing, when he comes out of hiding, it's always of note. I asked 93 or 95 before we started.
98.
Or 93 or 98. Yeah. Sorry, 98. I was right the first time. I wasn't right that time. 93 or 98. It was always going to be this artist out of New York City originally. Now I think Brazil, Paris, and the Bahamas. It's a Mr. Leonard Albert Kravitz. The album is 5. The number 5.
Yes.
Lenny Kravitz. All right, we look forward to talking about that next week.
One of the weirdest human beings on the planet.
Yeah. But that'll be next week.
My old favorites, If You Can't Say No, is on that album.
That'll be next week, and This Is This Week, and you can, of course, find us all over the internet. Recordbreakers.fun, rebelli.net, Rebelli TV on YouTube and on Twitch. You can find us all the VODs on YouTube of our episodes and of our other streams, and then Rebelli on Twitch. You can watch us live and watch this podcast through the Tomes, our TTRPG show, our GM mode streams, and whatever else we come up with in the future. Do all the things like, share, subscribe, find us everywhere you find podcasts. Do all the things. Until next time, hasta los huevos.
Toodaloo.
Fighting.
Crying not.
Diamond Club hopes you have enjoyed this program.